On the morning of October 25, 1944, a small American destroyer turned toward one of the strongest battle fleets still left in the world. Her name was USS Johnston. Her number was DD 557. Around 7:30 in the morning, heavy shells hit Johnston. She was not a battleship. She was not a heavy cruiser. She was a thin, fast, hard-working destroyer built to protect bigger ships, hunt submarines, make smoke, and fight when called. But that morning, off the island of Samar in the Philippines, she did something that still makes historians stop and ask the same question. As Johnston raced toward the Japanese line, her target became the heavy cruiser Yamato. Why did this small ship charge into a storm of Japanese battleships and cruisers when survival looked almost impossible? Before we go into that terrible morning, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this keep the memory of these men alive. USS Johnston was commissioned on October 27, 1943. She was a Fletcher-class destroyer built at Seattle, Washington during a time when the whole world was burning in war. Her first captain was Commander Ernest E. Evans, a brave officer from Oklahoma. He was of Native American heritage, and many sailors later remembered him as a man with a strong voice, strong eyes, and a heart made for battle. From the first day, he wanted his crew to understand one thing: Johnston would never be a ship that ran from danger. But before the smoke, before the fire, before the desperate turn toward the Japanese fleet, Johnston was also home. More than 300 men lived inside her steel body. They slept in tight spaces. They ate quick meals. They joked when they could. Sometimes the goal is to force the enemy to stop, turn, think, or make a mistake. Some carried letters from wives, mothers, fathers, and children. Some had photos folded in pockets. Some were very young, barely old enough to understand how large the ocean could feel at night. To the world, Johnston was a ship. Armor matters. To them, she was their home, their shield, and their chance to come back alive. In early 1944, Johnston moved into the Pacific War. She supported operations in the Marshall Islands, including Kwajalein and Eniwetok. She fired her guns against enemy positions, protected other ships, and helped American forces move across the ocean one island at a time. Later, she served in the Solomons and supported the campaign around Guam in July 1944. These were not easy months. The Pacific was wide, hot, and dangerous. Enemy aircraft could appear from the clouds. Submarines could hide under the water. A calm day could become a killing ground in minutes. Still, Johnston became known as a fighting ship. Her crew learned to trust each other. They learned the sound of alarms, the feel of the deck under speed, the smell of oil and hot metal. They learned that fear did not disappear. It simply had to be carried. That was one of the first lessons of Johnston. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was doing the needed thing while fear stood beside you. By October 1944, the United States was moving to retake the Philippines. This was one of the great turning points of the Pacific War. General Douglas MacArthur had promised to return, and now American troops were landing at Leyte. If the landing succeeded, Japan would lose a vital road through the Pacific. If Japan could destroy the invasion fleet, the cost for the Americans could be terrible. So the Japanese Navy made a huge plan. Several forces would move against the American fleet from different directions. One of these forces, led by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, was called the Center Force. It included powerful battleships and cruisers. Among them was Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, with huge guns that could throw shells across the sea. The force also included other battleships such as Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna, along with cruisers and destroyers. The Americans believed this force had been stopped or turned back after heavy attacks. But in the early hours of October 25th, Kurita's ships came through the San Bernardino Strait. They moved toward a small American group off Samar. That group was known as Taffy 3. Taffy 3 was not meant to fight battleships. It had 6 escort carriers. These carriers were smaller and slower than fleet carriers. Their job was to support troops on land, launch aircraft, and help protect the invasion. Around them were 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. She made them turn guns away from the carriers. USS Johnston was one of the destroyers. These ships were brave, but they were not equal to the force coming toward them. The difference was almost impossible to believe. Japanese battleships carried massive guns. American escort carriers had thin protection. Destroyers like Johnston carried 5-inch guns and torpedoes. The Japanese advance had slowed. They could hurt larger ships, but only if they came close enough, and coming close meant moving into the mouth of death. At about 6:45 in the morning, the men of Taffy 3 saw something that did not belong on the horizon. Masts, smoke, shapes. Then splashes began to rise in the water. The Japanese had opened fire. Tall columns of water exploded around the American ships. Some sailors at first thought they were under attack by cruisers. Then they understood the truth. Johnston's answer was movement. Battleships were firing at them. The peaceful routine of morning vanished. Men ran to battle stations. Engines pushed harder. Smoke screens began to spread across the water. The escort carriers turned away, trying to escape. Her engines and guns could no longer answer the way they had before. Their aircraft began launching, sometimes with whatever weapons they had, even if those weapons were not made for attacking heavy warships. Pilots would soon dive against the Japanese with bombs, rockets, depth charges, and even empty guns just to distract them. At the edge of this chaos stood Johnston. She could have stayed close to the carriers and made smoke. She could have waited for orders. She could have tried to survive as long as possible. But Commander Ernest Evans saw the danger clearly. If the Japanese fleet reached the escort carriers, it could destroy them. If it kept moving, it could threaten the transports and soldiers near Leyte. This was not just about one ship. It was about the lives of thousands. So Johnston turned toward the enemy. This is the moment historians still study. Not because it was simple, not because it was only brave. They study it because it shows how one decision, made in minutes, can change the shape of a battle. Johnston was small, but she attacked first. She moved toward ships many times her size. She was there far below the waves, resting in darkness. Her guns began firing. Her torpedoes were prepared. Her smoke trailed behind her. Every second brought her closer to Japanese guns that could break her apart. The sea around Johnston erupted. Shells fell near her. Water climbed into the air like white towers. The Japanese force was surprised. Some of them even thought the charging destroyer was a cruiser, because no small destroyer should have attacked with such force. But Johnston kept coming. Her captain and crew knew the truth. They did not have to defeat the whole Japanese fleet. They had to slow it, confuse it, hurt it, pull its fire away from the carriers, buy time. And in war, sometimes time is the most precious thing a man can buy. Kumano was much larger than Johnston. She had heavier guns, thicker protection, and the power of a major warship. But Johnston had speed, surprise, torpedoes, and a crew that was ready to fight at close range. The destroyer fired her 5-inch guns again and again. The men worked fast. Shells moved from hands to gun mounts. Orders passed through noise and smoke. The air shook. Johnston's gunfire struck Kumano's upper works and started damage on the cruiser. Then Johnston launched torpedoes. At least one torpedo hit Kumano and blew off part of her bow. The damage forced Kumano out of the fight. This was a huge result from a small ship. In only minutes, Johnston had hurt one of the powerful ships leading the Japanese attack. They wanted to make the enemy turn, hesitate, and waste time. The sea filled with smoke, oil, wreckage, and men in the water. But success came with a terrible price. For years, some reports said these were 14-inch shells from Congo. Later study of Japanese records showed that the damage likely came from Yamato's huge guns and secondary guns. What matters for the story is the effect. Johnston was smashed. The ship was badly damaged, low in the water, and near helpless. Large shells tore through her thin hull. Because the shells were made to pierce armor, some passed through without exploding. That fact saved her from instant destruction. But the damage was still awful. Power was lost in parts of the ship. Steering became difficult. Speed dropped. She had returned to defend the carriers. Fires broke out. Men were killed and wounded. The bridge was damaged. Commander Evans was hurt. He lost fingers on one hand and his clothes were torn. But he stayed in command. He moved to the after steering area and continued to direct the ship. Johnston was bleeding, but she was not dead. This is another reason historians study her. Many ships fight well when they are strong. Johnston kept fighting when she was broken. The battle around Samar became a scene of confusion and courage. Taffy III's other destroyers, Hull and Heermann, also charged. The destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts fought like a much larger ship. The escort carriers launched aircraft under fire. Pilots attacked again and again. Some planes had no proper anti-ship weapons left, but they still made runs at the Japanese. Johnston came out of smoke and rain, damaged but still dangerous. She fired at Japanese ships whenever she could. She helped support the attacks of the other small American ships. Some may have thought of home. She made smoke. She moved between the Japanese and the carriers. Every action was another attempt to protect the slower, weaker escort carriers behind her. For the Japanese, the battle became more confusing than expected. They had the stronger force, but they faced smoke, aircraft, torpedoes, and small ships that attacked as if they were much larger. The American escorts did not behave like ships that knew they were outmatched. They behaved like ships that had already accepted the cost. The Japanese commander, Vice Admiral Kurita, had been through heavy attacks before reaching Samar. His force had already lost ships in the wider Battle of Leyte Gulf. Now, in the smoke and confusion, He could not clearly see the exact size and type of the American ships. The brave attacks by Johnston and the other escorts made the small American force look more dangerous than it was. That mattered. War is not only metal against metal. It is also information, fear, judgment, and time. Johnston's crew kept fighting in terrible conditions. Water entered the ship. Fires had to be controlled. Wounded men needed help. Some guns were knocked out. Others kept firing. The ship had lost much of her speed, but she was still a threat. She was like a wounded animal that refused to stop protecting its young. One of the most dramatic moments came when Johnston saw Japanese destroyers forming for a torpedo attack against the American escort carriers. The carriers were in grave danger. If Japanese destroyers launched torpedoes into them, the result could be deadly. But Johnston's first charge became one of the clearest symbols of the whole fight. Johnston moved to stop them. She fired on the enemy destroyers and helped break up their attack. Once again, the small ship bought time for others. At this point, Johnston was no longer just making one charge. She was fighting many small battles inside one large battle. She had attacked Kamano. She had taken heavy damage. What do you do when the giant comes for the people you are sworn to protect? She had supported other American escorts. She had fired at larger ships. She had challenged destroyers. Every move used up more of the ship. Every minute took more from the crew. The American escort carrier Gambier Bay came under heavy fire and was eventually sunk. Hull was also lost. Samuel B. Roberts fought with incredible courage and was sunk as well. Yet the sacrifice was not empty. The escort carriers had more time to flee. Aircraft kept attacking. The small boys of Taffy 3, as destroyers and destroyer escorts were often called, were changing the battle by refusing to act small. This is where the question becomes deeper. Why do historians still study Johnston's charge? Because the charge was not only an act of bravery, it was a tactical decision under extreme pressure. Commander Evans understood that waiting meant death for the carriers. Attacking meant probable death for Johnston, but it also gave the carriers a chance. He chose the action that gave the mission a chance, not the action that gave his own ship the best chance. That is the hard lesson. She made them worry about torpedoes. In battle, the right decision is not always the safe decision. Sometimes the right decision is the one that makes the enemy react. Johnston forced the Japanese to react. She hurt Kamano. She helped create confusion. She became a problem the enemy could not ignore. And because the enemy could not ignore Johnston, other Americans lived. By mid-morning, the destroyer was in terrible shape. Her speed was nearly gone. Her guns were running out of strength. The ship had been hit again and again. Men were exhausted. The wounded lay where they could. The living kept working because there was nothing else to do. Johnston was now close to the end, but the battle had not taken her spirit. The Japanese fleet still towered around her. The sky still carried aircraft. The sea still shook with gunfire. Somewhere behind the smoke, the escort carriers were still trying to escape. And on Johnston, Commander Evans and his crew continued to fight from a ship that should already have been silent. For decades, Johnston rested in deep water. That is why this story does not feel like a simple battle report. It feels like a test of human will. A small ship had looked at impossible odds and moved forward anyway. But the sea had not yet finished taking its price. Near the end, USS Johnston was surrounded by enemy fire. But she had already done what she had been asked to do. She had helped slow a far stronger force. She had helped protect Taffy 3. She had helped save lives near Leyte. At about 9:45 in the morning, the order came to abandon ship. For the men of Johnston, this was not a clean escape. It was chaos. The ship was torn open. Smoke and steam filled spaces. Some men had to jump into water covered with oil and wreckage. Others helped wounded shipmates. Many would spend long hours in the sea before rescue. Some would not survive those hours. Johnston sank around 10:10 in the morning on October 25, 1944. Of the 327 men aboard, only 141 survived. About 186 were lost. Commander Ernest E. Evans did not return. He was last seen after giving everything he had to keep his ship fighting. For his actions, he was later awarded the Medal of Honor. Johnston also received the Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. These honors matter, but they do not fully explain the story. Medals can name courage. They cannot measure the full weight of it. The battle off Samar ended in a result that still amazes many people. The Japanese force, though far stronger on paper, turned away. It did not destroy the Leyte invasion fleet. It did not break through to the transports. The small ships and aircraft of Taffy 3 had helped stop something that looked unstoppable. Johnston was not alone in this. Hull Heerman Samuel B. Roberts, the destroyer escorts, the escort carriers, and the pilots all played vital roles. Historians return to Johnston because the battle shows that size does not always decide the result. Numbers matter. War was not beautiful that morning. Guns matter. But decisions also matter. Speed matters. Surprise matters. Smoke matters. Moral courage matters. Johnston did not sink Yamato. She did not destroy the whole Japanese fleet. That is not the lesson. The lesson is that she changed the enemy's behavior at the exact moment when change was needed. In simple words, Johnston made a giant hesitate. That hesitation helped save lives. For sailors, this story became a lesson in leadership. Commander Evans did not wait for perfect information. He did not wait for safety. He saw the mission and acted. His crew followed because they trusted him and because they trusted each other. A ship is not only steel, engines, and guns. A ship is also the bond between people inside it. When that bond is strong, even a small ship can become something larger than its size. For historians, the battle is also a lesson in confusion. On maps, war can look clean. Blue arrows move here. Red arrows move there. But on the morning of October 25, 1944, the real sea was full of smoke, rain, fire, bad signals, fear, and wrong guesses. The Japanese saw small ships, but did not always know what they were. The Americans saw a force they had not expected. Pilots attacked with whatever they carried. Ships turned to avoid torpedoes. Shell splashes hid targets. In that confusion, bold action had great power. This is why Johnston's charge is studied in classrooms, books, and naval discussions. It shows how a leader can use aggression to change a battle. It shows how a weaker force can create time and space. It shows that the goal of an attack is not always to destroy the enemy. There is also another reason the story still lives. She was gone from sight, but not from memory. Survivors carried the story. Families carried names. It was one of the deepest shipwreck dives ever made. Historians carried reports. The number 557 became more than a home number. It became a symbol of a ship that charged into danger for others. In 2019, explorers found parts of a Fletcher-class destroyer deep in the Philippine Sea, but the wreck could not be fully identified at that time. Then, in 2021, a new expedition reached the wreck at about 21,180 feet below the surface. The explorers saw the number 557 on the bow. They saw gun mounts, torpedo racks, and the remains of a ship that had fought until the end. USS Johnston had been found. That discovery gave the story a new silence. The ship was no longer only words and reports. Nothing was taken. The wreck was treated as a war grave. It is the resting place of many of her crew. The ocean had kept her for nearly 77 years, but her name had never really disappeared. When people ask why historians still study how USS Johnston charged a Japanese battleship force alone, the answer is not only about the past. It is about what people do when the situation is unfair, when the enemy is stronger, when escape is uncertain, and when others depend on them. Johnston's story is painful because many men died. It is powerful because their action gave others a chance to live. The men aboard Johnston did not wake up that morning knowing they would become a legend. They woke up as sailors. They had jobs to do. They had friends beside them. Some may have hoped the day would be quiet. Then the horizon filled with enemy ships, and their small destroyer had to answer a question no one ever wants to face. Forward movement. Into smoke. Into shell fire. Into history. That is why the story still matters. Not because it makes war look beautiful. It was loud, cruel, and full of loss. The story matters because it shows duty at its highest cost. It shows men who were afraid but still acted. It shows a captain who understood that a small ship could still make a large difference. It shows a crew that kept fighting after the world around them had broken. And somewhere in the deep water off Samar, the number 557 still rests in silence. It reminds us that courage is not always loud after the battle ends. Sometimes courage becomes a quiet shape on the ocean floor, waiting for a new generation to ask why it mattered. If this story moved you, leave a like, write in the comments what part of Johnston's last stand stayed with you the most, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of courage, sacrifice, and history that should never be forgotten.